I mean, you had Kaja Kallas at the Munich Security Conference. She was like the designated spokesperson of the EU elite, but she was basically rejecting the entire message. She was saying we got no civilizational problem. Everything's fine in Europe. I don't know what you guys in America are complaining about.
There is almost like a shorthand for you call someone a fascist. That means you can punch them, you can attack them, you can do whatever you like.
You know what is crazy about the whole thing? That the media don't even bother to express some kind of remorse for what happened, but they focus on how to label this young man who died, and they label him as a far-right activist. So these people should be held responsible, and the whole organization should be dissolved and designated, in my opinion, as a criminal or terrorist organization.
So hello and welcome back to the MCC Brussels podcast. As ever, I'm Jacob Reynolds, and this week we got lots to talk about. We're talking about Marco Rubio's big speech to the Munich Security Conference and what it means for Europe-America relations. We're going to take a look at the tragic killing of a young man, Quentin, in France at the hands of Antifa. And we're also going to ask the question, is Europe splitting apart with reported moves for two-speed Europe? Joining me this week, we're delighted to welcome back Daria Malec, who's an assistant and advisor in the European Parliament. Welcome back, Daria.
Hi, good to be here again.
And joining us back, regular guest Agnieszka, Kolek.
Thank you for having me.
Delighted to have you back. Right, so coming first to this big speech by Marco Rubio, I mean, the real shockwave for European elites was maybe last year when J.D. Vance delivered quite a shocking, by the standards of the European elites, speech at the Munich Security Conference. Lots of people suggested that Marco Rubio's speech was just full of loads of great lines about the dangers of climate hysteria, mass migration, all the rest of it. But the main thrust of the commentary was that this was a more conciliatory speech. This was designed to emphasize that Europe and America can still be friends. I think lurking behind that kind of friendly exterior, Daria, was actually quite a stark message to the Europeans. What did you make of the speech?
So first of all, I really have to say that I liked this speech by Marco Rubio. I think he did a great job with the words he used and with the historical references to how EU and US have to be united and that they have always shared the same goal since the Cold War. Well, he did refer to issues that EU's bureaucracy imposes, and because of these issues, it holds competitiveness of EU, which is mass migration, the open borders, and he emphasized that this is our common problem. He did not only criticize Europe, and I think in his speech he wanted to emphasize that America's and the US still stands as the biggest ally of EU, and they do not want to only criticize the EU, but this criticism sometimes, or harsh words that EU can perceive as harsh, is for the good of the Europeans, because as he emphasized, they share cultural heritage, history, and only united they can combat those crises like mass migration or energy policies. He also stated that the energy policies imposed by EU, they impoverish their own people, so our own people. And for me, this was a very good speech, and it emphasized the continuous friendship. I didn't see anything in the speech that might mean there is a worsening of the relations. And I believe even if some countries, some nations perceived that transatlantic cooperation as deteriorating, that speech might have saved it, in some way reversed it. As you know, for us Polish people, we rely on the United States, and we still consider them our biggest ally in terms of defense cooperation, economic cooperation, etc.
And Agnieszka, it seemed to me that the heart of the speech was as it were, a civilisational call to action, was a sense that, and this was the message I think that was actually quite stark for at least the European elites, even if most ordinary Europeans probably agree with him. But there was a sense that he was trying to sound an alarm. And there was the great line in the speech about the not wanting to be the polite and orderly caretakers of the West's decline. What did you make of the speech? Was there this kind of big civilisational message? And importantly, do you think that's actually going to hit home for Europeans?
Actually, here I would stress that he called it managed decline. This is not a decline that just happens by chance. This is not a decline that happened because some external forces wishing us will. this is managed decline. So this is by design, by the decisions made by the elite years after years. And I think, yes, definitely, this is at the core of this speech. And I think there is a warning that might not be so stark as from the previous speech from J.D. Vance. But there is a warning that, yes, we want to go with you. We want to be together. And this word together was used over 25 times, if not more, in the speech. But if you are not ready to go with us, we will go alone. So there was definitely a warning and a wake-up call. And I think here, not many commentators pick up on that, but I think that was more of a speech to the EU elite, not Europeans per se. Because obviously Europe is combined of different nations with different histories. So there is a difference between history of Western European nations and then Eastern and Central European nations. How the history has been when they were behind the Iron Curtain, how they had to overcome economical difficulties coming out of that system, lack of free speech, lack of freedom, lack of economic freedom, not only freedom of speech, but also economic freedom. And in a sense, when that this critical voice is almost seeing Americans as too brash and too moving forward, I think in Eastern and Central Europe, there is more of this feeling of, yes, we want to achieve things. Yes, we want to move forward. We want to innovate. While the Western Europe seems to be asleep, seems to be living off from the money that are from the past, the heritage from the past, and they just wasting it away. And what is worse is that because we have to operate within the European Union, they're taking us, Central and Eastern Europe, down with themselves, imposing the migration pact against the wish of the people and the Green Deal and the results of it, while at the same time claiming that, yes, we can do it alone, autonomy without America. While for Poland and for this part of Europe, it's a very dangerous situation. They have no industry, no defense, while they want to do the autonomy.
And Daria, I'm quite interested in whether the actual key message of the speech is likely to even be recognized or registered by EU elites. Especially, I mean, you had Kaja Kallas at the Munich Security Conference. She was like the designated spokesperson of the EU elite. But she was basically rejecting the entire message. She was saying this, we got no civilizational problem. Everything's fine in Europe. I don't know what you guys in America are complaining about.
That is something I'm worried about, that even with such a powerful and clear speech, because you couldn't get clearer than Marco Rubio did, I'm afraid that EU will just ignore such message and they will keep following the previously taken agenda. I'm not sure whether still with such a crisis that we have now, some of the countries woke up in terms of limiting migration. You probably are aware of the Spanish government's decision regarding migration and letting in still more migrants. So I doubt that we will wake up, because Europe now thinks they need to kind of be a rival, a competitor to the US in terms of defense. And I'm afraid, except for Poland and some other nations, most of the nations, they want to follow a bi-European approach, create their own common defense, let's say, European common defense, instead of focusing on continuing the cooperation in terms of NATO. Of course, we are still in NATO, but they are undermining NATO based on the comments made by Donald Trump regarding Greenland, for example. So it really shows a bad message. I think we're not on the right track yet, because we have to understand that despite our differences, despite Trump's decision on imposing tariffs on European Union, which is a failure of the Commission and President von der Leyen, because she negotiated a bad deal. India, look at India, they negotiated a much better deal. Why couldn't we follow that path? So what I'm trying to say is that we blame the US for everything, but we have to understand their perspective. They have been tired of waiting for us to keep up, to increase the pace of defense spending. Trump has been saying about that since 2017, and look where it got us. Even Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, praised Trump for saying that we can be grateful to President Trump for having over 2% GDP spending on defense because he was the one pushing us. So your question, whether Europe will change its course, European leaders, I'm not really sure. I know that conservative leaders are smart enough to cooperate closely with the United States and try to reverse the mistakes of liberal governments like migration, energy policy. We're still trying. Sometimes we are winning in the parliament with conservative side amendments or things like that.
Yeah, I'm just interested in the degree to which, not even if these leaders can change course, because that's also a question, whether even they recognize that there's the problem. I don't even think they speak the same language as the populist politicians that are represented by Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, etc. Agnieszka, the one thing, though, that they do seem pretty certain on, and this was the Munich Security Conference was full of this, for example, in Emmanuel Macron's speech, was they're pretty certain they're going to respond to this new geopolitical moment by kind of closing everything down, by more control of the internet. This is kind of Macron's big idea. It's like they take the opposite lesson of the past few years.
I think they are, I agree with you that they want to, the more they lose control, the more they want to hold on to it. And obviously, because they don't really look into the mirror and see their own reflection, they think it's someone else's fault. So they project all of that on the outside. And I think the problem is that they so fixated on the political project of centralization and controlling every aspect of human life in Europe that they cannot see that the reality has changed, and whether this project was right or wrong, it's not going to work in the current situation. But they're desperate to make it work and to push through. And this is really dangerous because now we are in a time that the 20-year plan, 10-year plan, 50-year plan is not going to work. We live in a different world, dramatic change, geopolitical tensions, huge technological developments, huge need for energy. And we are being left behind, and it will become like a Skansen at best, because then at least there's, something to look at. Might end even worse, because with these plans that they're having and the open borders, it's a disaster waiting to happen.
Moving now to some tragic, shocking, but in some ways not entirely unexpected news, because we noted with extreme concern the death of this young patriotic student, Quentin at the hands, it looks like, of Antifa assailants. He was a young man who'd been involved in a protest organised by our friends at Collective Nemesis. They were protesting against what can be described as the kind of key representative of the Islamo-left in a member of the assembly in France, Rima Hassan. For a long time, it seems, Agnieszka, Antifa have operated with a kind of impunity. There's countless examples of the way that they go after young right-wing or patriotic people, that even to the degree that the French kind of term the whole thing lynching, because there's such a kind of modus operandi to the way that they behave. But is this, in some sense, as tragic as it was? This was kind of something that was always on the cards, given the way that Antifa have been allowed to operate with impunity.
Yes, and what is really troubling is, first of all, there is this track record of escalating violence, the high level of organization behind these attacks, and then also how the elites and the media gives a quiet permission to that by not reporting honestly as things develop over time, not shining light on that. And there is also a correlation with the more the elites on European level push for censorship and use quite promiscuously the word fascist and far right by naming their opponents and trying to shut down the debate, this word has been devalued. It's been used for anyone that you don't agree with. you don't have any responsibility to explain why you calling people these names, what really stands behind it. There is almost like a shorthand for you call someone a fascist. That means you can punch them, you can attack them, you can do whatever you like. And this creates a situation where, yes, it gets to the point that almost a dozen men would follow a young man and kick him and punch him and get him to the floor and continue with viciously. I urge the viewers of our podcast to look at the source material just to be aware of what we're talking about, because the way it's being portrayed by the media is, there was a fight, there was altercation, or, in a sense suggesting that, nothing really to see here. It was just an accident. It's a little bit like maybe he was pushed and he hit the ground the wrong way. So I think the viewers should see the video of the attack to see how ferocious it was. And in a sense, it's not surprising how it ended. And this is tragic.
Daria, what did you make of these events? Obviously, now we got the news just recently that now 9, maybe 11 people have been arrested, and there's opened a murder investigation. What did you make of the events of the last few days with regards to this?
Well, sadly, I was not very surprised because Antifa is known for its violence. So I will just get to maybe the core of the issue with Antifa, which in my opinion is the fact that it has no structure. Antifa is basically an organization without any CEO, any hierarchy, any spokesperson. You can just join as you are, and there is no organization, there is no register of the people who are part of it. That's why most of the people who are in Antifa are simply thugs. That's also what President Trump very often emphasized before designating Antifa as a terrorist organization with an executive order. So it should give us a lot to think about. And because there is no structure, they are basically above the law because there is no control over who is a part of it, who committed violence, who performed some riot, and they just basically commit those illegal acts. Well, I think this is outrageous, especially when I saw that there was no information, not too much information in American media such as CNN or other mainstream popular European media. I've seen just a few videos with around few thousand views, which is for me very shocking since it's a death of a young prominent student who was beaten to death. And remember George Floyd. What happened when George Floyd, a criminal, a drug addict, was accidentally killed by a white police officer in US? The parliament, I would like the viewers to know that, held 1 minute of silence for this man. When Charlie Kirk was shot, which is, I think, a similar case as Quentin, because he was as media labeled it, the left-leaning media, far-right activist.
Mm-hmm.
You know what is crazy about the whole thing? That the media don't even bother to express some kind of remorse for what happened, but they focus on how to label this young man who died, and they label him as a far-right activist, and he did nothing on that day. Even if he was shouting, protesting, or insulting anyone, it's not a reason to beat him, to even touch him. So these people should be held responsible, and the whole organization should be dissolved and designated, in my opinion, as a criminal or terrorist organization. I would be leaning towards a criminal one.
Yeah, Agnieszka, I'm also interested in the kind of the way in which these organizations are supported officially, unofficially by prominent organizations. So already in this case, it's turned out that lots of the people who are now accused of the murder have got links with the party of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the Front Insoumise, and there's this sense, I mean, there's been pictures distributed of them even holding meetings in the building that are owned and operated by these left-wing political parties. It seems that as well as getting to grips with the criminal aspect of these organizations, you also have to get to grips with the way that they're intertwined with the kind of leftist political establishment.
Yes, how they intertwine with established parties. Here in this example is France, but then they also support activities of each other between the countries. There's been a long history of the German Antifa coming to Poland to beat people up. So I think there is also an aspect of that. And obviously now with interconnectedness over the internet, with the know-how on how to bypass the law, how to organize, how to make sure you're not being detected, and it's not so easy to recognize who is doing what and why, because it's all about masking, using umbrellas. There is a very good book mapping out these tactics of Antifa in USA by Andy No. So definitely there has to be more light shined on that, and it has to be dissected, and it should be in the open, and the public should know. It shouldn't be just a matter that this is discussed just by the politicians and intellectuals on the right, but this should be public knowledge that we stand for free speech, we stand for open debate, and there is no place for violence. Because I think we have to try to avoid that this is just about the far left and, as they call, far right. Here in this case, the young man was protecting women, protesting. They were just unfurling a banner. It wasn't about the shouting match or anything like that. And he got beaten to death for that, for protecting women. And it has to be stressed. So that's why I think it's important that this is in a public square, this is discussed openly, and the media has got responsibility to report honestly, truthfully, all the facts.
Yeah, I think that's an important point about the way in which this is turned quickly into a kind of complaint about the way that thugs behave, which it also is, but ignoring the fact that there's this wider culture that legitimizes the silencing of people that you disagree with, and ultimately, in this case, silencing them with violence, with extreme violence, and ultimately by killing them. And that's really this dehumanization of other people that occurs through the narrative is something that we have to get to grips with.
And a little bit about the background. Antifa comes from the interwar period. It was born in Germany, and the first idea was to be against fascism. It was anti-fascista Aktion, something like that, and it was basically a part of it was a paramilitary group of a communist party in Germany, and the flag, the symbol of Antifa today, it's still, as I'm not mistaken, the two red flags. It comes from communism. So if we think about it, we are having a far left with communist roots, paramilitary group, we could call it, because if they're starting doing that, what can come next? It can inspire other thugs, or even thugs who are not a part of it, to join it. You can just join as you want, and there is no control over it, and you can start killing people.
Right. I've finally for this week wanted to touch on the kind of repeated claims that we're moving into an era of what they call a two-speed Europe, or the different formats that are basically announced for European cooperation. And the news of the last week has been there was a kind of retreat for EU leaders at a castle not far from where we are in Brussels. And the outcome of this was, we need to really do something about competitiveness. But if not everyone can agree, maybe we'll move forward in a smaller format. So they're now moving a so-called E6 format. Now, Agnieszka, I'm interested in your take on this, because that is sold and portrayed as this is like a great development that allows faster cooperation between countries that agree. But to me, it looks like a sign of weakness.
I think it is a sign of weakness in a sense of, first of all, it claims on different levels. So we claim that European Union project is great. Kaja Kallas, in her response to Marco Rubio, she said that, there are even more countries wanting to join us, and this is a proof how well we're doing. But then this comes as a news that we're trying to create this smaller group because that would be more compatible and agile and responding to the crises that we're facing. So which one is the truth? So to be honest with you, I don't even see it as an honest attempt at achieving this. I see it more as an attempt to gain more control. And here it's not a really good balance, because Poland is joined up with these other countries where for the ones that feel really not self-assured, they would say, oh, it's great, we are being valued and we're being added to these bigger boys and girls of Europe. So Germany, France, and so on. But at the same time, this is a huge threat for us because we would be seen as a kind of junior partner, the one that constantly has to catch up, while we would be forced probably to take euro. We wouldn't be able to make major decision on defense because we would have to wait for the bigger countries to make these decisions. We are aware that there is an appetite to rebuild the economy of Germany and France with defense spending that would be sponsored by us. But then we wouldn't have much say in how it's going to be done and what will be bought and what will be delivered, because usually all of these plans coming from European Union are long-term. And in the current situation where everything changes so quickly, this is not realistic.
Yeah, and then Daria, what did you make of this? Because to me, it kind of looks a little bit like in a way, it's an admission of failure of the EU project.
Well, it reminds me a lot of omnibus. So you make a regulation to override existing regulation in order to reduce the burden. So you have this big project of EU with 27 member states, which are supposed to agree unanimously, right? And then you go on and create smaller groups, smaller circles to deal with the urgent matters, such as competitiveness, such as euro, which in fact can be a threat to us as Poland, and we might get forced to adopt euro since all the other nations in E6, they already have it. I cannot complain very much that we are among those nations, those 6 nations, because this is also quite historic that finally we're considered one of the biggest economy of Europe. And I am glad we are inside so we can perhaps have some influence, impact if there are any decisions taken, or maybe it's just another bureaucratic attempt to show the citizens that we are trying to tackle something. But why haven't we thought about improving defense already in 2022 when the full-scale invasion of Russia on Ukraine started? It's 2026, and is this the right time to start thinking, to make decisions in order to help competitiveness? I'm not really sure. And also I understand smaller nations such as Ireland who fear of being sidelined. They express those fears. And we already also have a Eurogroup consisting of 21 ministers of finance. So then I'm not really sure what will be the exact purpose of this Euro 6, and it might show some kind of failure of the big EU project because they're trying to override perhaps the unanimity by introducing qualified majority voting, which means that some of the votes will not be taken into considerations. And Poland, I think Slovakia, Hungary, these are the nations that may fear that. So whether it's a failure, I cannot say for sure, but I don't think it's a big success. Let's just see whether it's effective.
Yeah, I'm of the opinion, I think that these kind of, whenever push comes to shove, the EU's forced to actually abandon the so-called sacred principles of the EU's whenever there's a major geopolitical or pandemic issue, or when there's a pandemic, or like they're facing these competitive struggles. Actually, all of this the kind of kumbaya stuff about how the EU operates in terms of its we're all equal and everybody's the same, and we isn't it so great that we make decisions as 27 countries, etc., etc. All of that goes out the window, and they just they kind of adopt something else. So. Yeah. Right. By way of a little bonus, I wanted to take advantage of the fact that we got Daria here because you've got a particular interest in global politics, but especially in Japan. And there's been a really historic election in Japan. Daria, tell us a little bit about it and why our viewers who care about European politics and international politics, why should we care about the election in Japan?
We should care about election in Japan and Japan because Americans are especially interested in Indo-Pacific region, and it's a very important region for them, which is kind of our competitor to EU. So if we want, as European Union, have a strong transatlantic alliance, we have to be aware of what's going on in Asia, particularly in East Asia as well. What the election means, it means that the party, LDP, has had a very historic victory because it came from having the lowest ever result in the history in the past to the highest ever result with 316 seats that were won by LDP, by Takaichi's party, which gives her two-thirds of the seats in the parliament.
And for those who don't know, what kind of party does she represent? Why did she win? Why was it that her message resonated? But what's her politics?
Okay, so the party she represents, it is a liberal democratic party, but it is not a liberal party. It's I would say it's a conservative party, but it's not the most conservative ones, because you have Komeito, which is more to the right, but this is the party that has always been in charge. And this party, especially under Abe Shinzo and now under Prime Minister Takaichi, has worked on strong relations with the United States. What could have shifted now is that Prime Minister Takaichi wants to invest more in defense, and she believes Japan should start contributing over 2% of GDP on defense, which is something new because, as you are aware, Japan and Germany, since they were aggressors in the Second World War, they were usually not very developed after the war in terms of defense, and they were prohibited to hold nuclear weapons. And she said that she can see a direction for Japan to again work on nuclear weapons, that it can be the future, which some may not like it, but it can be another field for EU for defense cooperation, since she also said that once China attacks Taiwan, Japan will come with help. So they are also pro-Taiwan, just like the Americans. So we should find some common points. We should be looking at those common points. And this is important for us. Whether you support China or Taiwan, I do not impose any of the opinion on that, because there are people who have different opinions. But we have to look for common points. And if Japan wants to invest in defense, this is our opportunity for EU to also seek alternatives.
Yeah, and Agnieszka, also slightly indicative of the times that you've got a right-wing patriotic candidate promising kind of tougher action on security. And this seems to be the tenor of our times right across the globe.
Also, to note on her stance on migration, she's been quite tough on that topic, because this is probably unknown to some of our viewers. There were issues with that in Japan as well, because there's this kind of a picture-perfect image of Japan that no migration gets through. But actually, the recent years under the previous administration, the migration was getting there as well, and was changing culturally Japan, and the voters were not pleased with that. I think it's a sign of realism coming back into politics, and voters wanting the politicians to do what they were voted in for, instead of promising things and not delivering them.
Yeah, well, we congratulate her on the victory. Another populist or another patriotic candidate in power is always a good thing. But for us on the MCC Brussels podcast, that's all we've got time for. If you enjoyed the podcast, please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever else you get your podcast. Leave us a comment, share this. We're also, we put the podcast out on X as well, so you can share it with everyone on X. Make sure you let us know what you thought of the podcast. But for now, thanks so much to Agnieszka Kolek.
Thank you for having me.
And Daria Malec, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.